Ladies and gentlemen, open banking pioneers, hello and a big warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, we all lead such busy and frenetic lives that it's just lovely to have some time together around our campfire to focus on the industry that we all love. And I'm absolutely delighted to see so many open banking pioneers from around the world that have tuned in. It means an enormous amount to us, and it's very humbling too, so thank you. Now, we've just completed an extensive feedback exercise to shape our agenda for the rest of the year. Now, it's important that we listen. This is your community. Our conversation is driven by you. So I would just like to say a big thank you to everybody that's connected with us on LinkedIn to give their feedback and on Twitter. And we've had Zoom call after Zoom call, as you can probably imagine. It's been great fun. And we've had a couple of those old retro telephone calls as well, which I actually quite like. So thank you, everybody. Now, the discussion that everybody wanted was open banking 2.0, beyond the regulations. So that's what we have here today. Now, we would like you to help shape this conversation with us and to engage and to take part. So we're all spread around the globe. And what we've done is we've brought together a fantastic group of experts. It's absolute wonderwall of experts. And I would like you to ask them as many questions so we can get as much wisdom out of them as we possibly can. So don't be shy. Do ask your questions and please share your thoughts. So our live poll questions are super easy to answer, and it does make a big difference. So the first one is, what is the role of standards when looking at commercializing APIs? And we're also now trying something new, an open text poll. So please share your thoughts. Now, I know everybody has an opinion and we would love to hear from it. And this is, where do you see the biggest opportunity for open banking enabled growth? Now, I'm going to leave the charge on that one. I believe it should be open banking payments, and that open banking payments should be ubiquitous. However, it's what you think that counts. Now, we wanted to ensure we always have a broad conversation. So we've gathered a very special selection, as I said, a wonder wall of speakers to share their exceptional thinking and their insight. Now, I'm going to leave the introduction honours to Rory, our guest host. So let me just tell you a little bit about Rory and introduce him to you. Rory's from Accenture, and he had the privilege to work with UK Finance. And subsequently, he authored the Open Banking Future State Report. Now, this will undoubtedly shape the industry landscape. So we've asked Rory to share a little of his insight, and it forms part of this conversation. Now, you can actually download the full report. Tatiana has always beautifully put it on LinkedIn. So please, after this live session, you can go and see that there. So before I hand over to Rory, I would like to say a big congratulations to Nigel at Railsbank and for their US launch, and for Jim at Mastercard for Mastercard's acquisition stateside. If we weren't online now, you would be hearing champagne corks popping. However, I'm sorry about that. So it's a virtual toast. Well done, you both. As you know, we have this fantastic global audience. And what we've learned that is our friends in Latin America and North America will be tuning in now and listening live. And then in the morning, our friends in Asia Pac will watch the on-demand session. So what I would like to do now, Rory, as part of the introductions, would love to hear a little from Nigel and Jim about their stateside activities, please. So Rory, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I hope everyone can hear me okay. My name's Rory Sutton, and I'm part of the Accenture leadership team for UK Open Banking, and I look at our growth strategy and cross-industry engagements. As part of this, as Helen said, I was lucky enough to work with UK Finance and a selection of participants from across the open banking ecosystem in looking at what the future for open banking could look like and how we could leverage the capabilities that have been put in place over the last few years to then enable new propositions, either commercially driven by the market or for supporting open data, the BEIS project, or potentially open finance that's being in consultation with the FCA at the moment. As Helen said, that report is available to download either from the LinkedIn link or through UK Finance's publications website. And as Helen also said, I'm the host for today's session, so I will be asking the questions to our panelists and have the rather unenviable task of trying to keep to time today. So, couple of other points, I think, just on housekeeping. We do also have a questions tab on Slido, so if you've got questions that are relevant, please do put them in there, and I'll be keeping an eye on those to ask away. So, if I could now ask our panelists to introduce themselves and their companies and their current roles and responsibilities, please, starting with Jim.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks, Helen, and Tatiana, of course, also for organising OBE. Always a great event, and delighted to come along today. So yeah, I lead open banking at Mastercard, and that's in itself a privilege. But as Helen trailed, we've just since the last of these events announced the acquisition of a US business called Finicity. I'm sure we can go into a bit more detail on that if of interest later in the session, but I guess just as headlines for those who don't know Finicity, they're one of the leading aggregators in the US open banking market, and they also have particular strengths in taking that open banking data, categorizing it, analyzing it, and turning it into value, and they're particularly strong in serving the needs of the lending industry in the US. We're very excited about the acquisition, obviously. I will tell you it's been kind of interesting completing confirmatory due diligence purely through Zoom or equivalent through the lockdown period. That's a new one for all of us, I think. But yeah, pleased to announce it, and obviously we'll see where it goes. But yeah, big statement from us. I think, if anyone had any doubt about Mastercard's enthusiasm for the topic of open banking, or indeed our global intent, then I suspect that deal kind of clarifies any questions one might have had.
Thank you, Jim, and congratulations again. So, Chris, would you like to go next?
Thank you. My name is Chris Michael. I've, for the last 3.5, nearly 4 years now, been leading the development of the standards within OBIE. Been a real journey. I think we're getting close to the end of the regulatory bit of that, but I think there's still a lot more interesting work to be done. I'm very happy to be here on this panel, and I'm sure it'll be a fantastic discussion today.
Thank you. And Nigel.
Hi, firstly, thank you to OBE hosting and the invitations again and setting up a wonderful event, especially under COVID. And my name is Nigel Verdon. I'm CEO and co-founder of Railsbank, and Railsbank goal is to enable any company to be a fintech. So startup companies on their journey to growing and becoming world-leading companies, or existing brands like supermarkets and others to offer financial services. We've just, as Helen said earlier on, and we just launched in the US. So that makes us the only global banking as a service platform, as we're now live in the US, UK, Europe, and Southeast Asia. US, we've also, and not only launched the US, we've also launched a new product, and that is a credit as a service product. And on top of that, we credit card as a service for the US market. And a wonderful guy called Dov Mamor, who we worked together when I was in Currency Cloud, which is the last company I founded. He then went to Green Dot and ran banking as a service of Green Dot as a well-known issue over there. And he now runs the United States or North America for Railsbank. So a shout out to Dov if he's listening. Welcome to the team. And he's already very well known in the United States, and hopefully he'll be able to be on one of these open banking excellence events as a talker sometime soon.
Excellent, and well done again, Nigel. And then last but not least, we've got Hetal.
Hi, Rory, Helen, OBE team, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Hetal Popat. I've been working in open banking now for 4 years. Like Chris, I started with the UK regulatory work as HSBC's lead facing into the CMA and PSC2 work. We've now taken that platform we built and the team who built it into a global space, and so I now lead the team who look after the markets that are steadily joining UK and Europe. So we're now live with open banking of various sorts in 19 markets across the HSBC footprint, and we've got at least another 5 to 6 we can see coming in the short term. And our focus is increasingly moving from regulation and building the platform to commercializing and competing. And I think it's a really exciting time to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So without further ado then, let's get into the content. So the report that we published with UK Finance was, looking forward, but before we get there, given the international presence and, some consider the UK ahead of others in maturity, what are the lessons that can be learned from the UK's experience of open banking over the last few years? Nigel, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. First of all, it's really what can be learned is the UK is very brave to take a stance and be the first mover on open banking, and being first mover, you also make and something that's totally new in the industry. There's bound to be learnings from it, and I think the rest of the world can learn some of the way where it's been executed in the UK. I think one of the real learnings thing was trying to understand the customer, because it was very much marketed, and especially on the government side, towards consumers, where if I went to my grandmother and asked my grandmother, or 90% of the market who aren't really technical, what open banking was, they wouldn't have a clue at all. So I think one of the learnings is if you're implementing open banking in your industry, is address the real customer of it, which is the fintech industry, the accounting industry, the lending industry, all the others who can build product. And then consumers, they will get amazing experiences on the back of that. So I think that's one area that was missed. Some other areas is I think the key thing is standards. The internet was successful in the 1990s because there was independent standards throughout the world, and I think blockchain still struggles on this because there's multiple competing standards. If you look at email, in the 1990s, there was a ton of competing email platforms from Microsoft, and Apple had its own. There's Open with SMTP and the web standards. When everybody settled on the standard, email then become ubiquitous amongst everybody out there. I think the challenge now is because we've already got UK standards, we've got the Berlin Group standards, we've got other standards appearing. As an industry, we almost need to give ownership of what open banking protocols are, so people implement them to a standards body. I think that's a learning from it. But to have standards, you've got to have somebody who went first, and so hats off to everybody in the UK who went first.
Thank you. Hetal, did you have a view from the bank's perspective?
Yeah, I agree with much of what Nigel said. Standards for us are critical as we look to take this into other markets. Not going through exactly the same challenges and reliving them would seem to be in everyone's interest. We have a platform that has real scale. Our UK open banking platform now has more customers using it daily than some of our small branches have in their entirety. So it makes complete sense for us to take those standards and port them into that market so that those customers can benefit quickly. And if each country were to choose to have its own slightly varied set of standards, that would slow down implementation and benefits realization for our end customers. I think it would also create greater operational and cyber risk. One of the key benefits of standards is when you see vulnerabilities, you can very quickly adapt and improve for everybody. It doesn't help us to have different standards in different markets, which then all need to be adapted to face into what are largely global vulnerabilities. I think the other big lesson is around commercialization. And here there's an inherent tension between regulation and market actors. We needed regulation to drive this. I think we've seen that in multiple markets. It's very hard to get this off the ground without a coordinating actor. This isn't mapping or media. We have a very small number of dominant firms. Banking is a very fragmented industry globally. So without somebody to bring us together, it's hard to force an ecosystem into place. On the other hand, if there isn't a commercial incentive to build and grow that ecosystem, then you don't get what you really want, which is customer-centric development. So I think, Rory, you and I have been working closely together over the last 6 months on the piece for UK finance. I think how the UK transitions from a regulatory-led process that has been very effective in creating this ecosystem, but now gives birth to a commercial ecosystem. I mean, that's going to be a real challenge for all of us to make happen.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess as you talk about the commercial opportunities there, probably leads us on to looking forward. And in terms of new business models or new customer propositions, what do you think will start to emerge as the ecosystem matures? Chris, do you want to start with that? Sorry.
Yes. So, I think that there are a number of very interesting opportunities. The kind of core model of open banking, as we all know, there's the kind of access to data and then initiation of payments, and those are the kind of prime high-level use cases at the moment. But the access to data under PSD2 is limited to certain data sets, so there are commercial opportunities for banks to provide additional data. Identity attributes being a kind of key one, and there's quite a lot of active talk about that at the moment. I don't know whether it's that in itself could create a significant additional benefit over and above the business models that we're seeing at the moment. I mean, if you think primarily at the moment, we're seeing business accounting, wealth management, financial management packages. We're seeing lending being a big business case at the moment, but all of these are largely based on the data sets that exist at the moment. I think where this gets really interesting is when you start to blend identity data with payment initiation, and that provides a really good opportunity for new business models to emerge. I also think that something that we've been looking at it's on the roadmap for developing a standard for this thing called variable recurring payments. I think that's a little bit away still, but that's where you really start to get a new proposition in place, which could be a significant step forward in terms of payment APIs. Could really start to provide a very useful alternative to some of the kind of existing payment methods. But that's not a regulatory requirement, certainly not for sort of e-commerce type payments, but it is something that's allowable under the regulations and could really provide a commercial opportunity that works for banks, works for third parties, works for merchants, and most importantly works really well for customers. And I think that's the thing that I find really exciting about a potential business model that will get all sorts of people very excited. But I think it's a little bit away yet, but that's what I believe.
Thank you. And I guess it's that move from open banking with capital O and B regulation to the more broad concept of data exchange and functionality through APIs there. Mm-hmm. Jim, did you have a view on the sorts of new customer propositions that might develop?
Yeah, thanks, Rory. Picking up a number of themes. I mean, firstly, strongly agree with what Chris said around the lending use case. and without kind of doing the commercial unduly, one of the reasons we've elected to acquire Finicity is because of their strengths in that space in the US. Now, the US is quite interesting. I mean, US has been doing open banking in some shape or form for much longer than we have in the UK, but without the kind of help of regulation, but also without quite the same level of robust infrastructure when it comes to things like APIs. But I mean, for example, roughly half of the US mortgage industry uses Finicity output to help with lending decisions. The sort of data they're using is, absolutely information out of current accounts, but also information from a variety of other sources, both bank accounts, so not just checking accounts, but also savings accounts and other loan accounts. And they also take data from non-banking sources as well to kind of create that more holistic picture, which helps a lender make a decision. Now, we think that's really important, not least from a financial inclusion perspective, getting past all of the traditional issues with thin credit files and so on. But it also kind of, I think, highlights one of the difficulties in the UK. And I think, I think everyone who's already spoken has kind of touched on it to some degree. The regulation and the work of the OBIE and so on has been very helpful to get us to this point. But it's a point, and we have to go beyond that. There is a clear commercial incentive to financial institutions to make available more data, in the sense that they are, when it comes to things like the lending use case, because kind of by definition, retail banks are also lenders. But it's an indirect business case. And I think what Chris was saying around the things like variable recurring payments, absolutely. I think there's that I would strongly suggest there's commercial opportunity for FIs in that space. And I think we have to kind of, move past the waiting to see what happens from the regulator next. I mean, I'm a strong supporter of the move to open finance and so on. There's nothing stopping institutions making available more data through, the same APIs or expanding their current sets of APIs right now. It doesn't have to wait to be kind of told what to do by, whether it's FCA or PSD3 or whatever else. So I think there's lots going on. There's lots of opportunity. I think the UK has certainly been, has certainly shown the way, and certainly as far as Europe is concerned. And there's a lot of catch up still to do. We all know that payments is only just getting going, and there's a lot more that needs to be done, here and elsewhere. For example, so we're at the start of a very long journey. I think an exciting one, obviously, but and I think it kind of needs leadership from particularly from some of the larger institutions and so on, because one's going to have to make some decisions which don't have necessarily the most obvious and immediate return to move the thing forward. Otherwise, regulators will come along and tell you what to do, and I don't think that's in anyone's interest, because of not least the sort of time cycle for regulation to get created.
Thank you. So I've heard there's some continued use of aggregation payments, and then before we had digital identity and financial inclusion. Hetal, sorry, before I cut you off before, in terms of developing some of these new propositions, what do you see as the main challenges, either from an industry perspective or from HSBC's perspective, in being able to achieve or deliver these and achieve scale?
So I think you have to separate payments and data to some extent. For payments, I think one of the key challenges is resilience. Thanks to firms like Mastercard, we have all got used to a world where payments work virtually flawlessly. So for any new rail to try and pick up and maintain that existing customer experience, it's pretty challenging. If I have a look at how we're performing now, we're better than 99% up for open banking payments. To my most measures, that's extremely good for a very young channel, but it's not as good as a credit card. And we have some work to do to get to that point. And until I think you hit those levels of resilience, it's going to be very hard to bring merchants and customers to use this, because there is an existing well-functioning ecosystem. I think the second gap on payments is around customer protection. If we just look at the pandemic and the impact that's had on all of us as personal customers, if you'd made a payment via a fast payment for a holiday, you have no protection. If you've made it via a credit card, you have substantial protection in most markets, whether that's via legal instruments or via chargeback and other scheme rules. So right now, if you're making a high value payment, which one would you choose to make, even if the technical rail were fully resilient for direct bank-to-bank payments? So until we address some of those gaps, I think we should expect there will be a slow rate of uptake for certain use cases. And so for me, if payments is going to take off in open banking, or when payments are going to take off, it needs to be addressing new use cases which don't need those same features. And there are many use cases where credit cards don't work. And similarly for data, I think Chris touched on the point that the data points available under regulation are well suited to certain narrow use cases, but there's an awful lot more you have to make available to drive innovation. The problem with doing that unilaterally as a firm, and I do take Jim's challenge that large firms do need to take some risk. The problem with being unilateral is I can't commercialize if I'm the only firm who's exposing the data. I've already got that data. So to make this work, you have to have significant market share making that data point available. And that's the chicken and egg problem. So we do need a coordinating actor in the ecosystem which encourages and helps firms bring these things through so that they can create benefit for themselves, i.e. their customers, because that's the only way we benefit, and also for other actors who are seeking to serve our customers. And that takes time, and it also takes, I think, the right institutional framework to bring that together.
Thank you. So,
Rory, can I just make a quick point there? Actually?
Please do.
I mean, I strongly agree with what Hetal was just saying around the kind of need for customer protection and stuff like that, you know, to kind of really help payments, open banking payments, and particularly in the consumer space, to really become or to reach their potential. And it's something we've kind of talked about a few times in various different forums. Strongly agree with that need. Just for interest, I guess, and anybody on the call who's listening who wants to participate, we talked about we're building a thing called Resolve, which is kind of a essentially a dispute resolution arbitration type service. We're just about to start recruitment for a pilot of that here in the UK. So if anyone on the line, you know, bank, TPP, acquirer, etc., would be interested in participating in that non-commercial pilot, really just to kind of see how things play out. To Hetal's point, to some extent, you know, large or small organisations perhaps taking a bit of risk to help move the things forward. Very happy to kind of talk about that and get you involved in that.
Thank you, Jim. And I think sort of as you started speaking there, we've got a few interesting questions here. So we might come on to those in a second. I think what we've broadly touched upon so far has actually been largely this regulatory driven evolution that's taken place in the UK. And I think what was outlined in the last implementation roadmap was that would end in 2021. And certainly in writing the report, one of the challenges that we had to work through was how to ensure there's continued evolution of open banking and it didn't sort of stagnate. So probably start with Chris. Do you have a view on what the balance should be between regulatory driven innovation or market led?
Yeah, I do have I suppose a number of points of view there, but I think the main one is that what's happened in the UK has been probably, of certainly other markets, it's been the most sort of regulatory driven sort of framework for open banking, and also the first major market to sort of push forward with this regulatory approach. But you know, you need regulations in every market because you need something to protect the customer. But the amount of the kind of amount of regulatory drive that you need or oversight that you need will vary enormously from market to market. Ultimately, the whole thing needs to be market driven though. If it's just regulation that's forcing a market to do something and the market itself isn't driving it and the end customer need isn't driving it, then you've missed the point. So you absolutely need a balance. But I think what we will see in other markets is that the balance will shift more to a market-driven approach with a lighter touch regulation. And the reason I say that is, building on a point that Hetal made earlier, is that banks are now starting to see that there is opportunity and commercial benefit in it. So, and the point that Jim made about, not necessarily waiting for the regulators to tell people what to do. I mean, these are important points, and I think the balance is going to shift more in other markets who are going to see the benefits and start embracing this, because an API channel is another commercial channel and can offer very significant benefits. So I think, yes, it's been tough for everyone in the UK. Probably, it kind of had to be tough, and we made, maybe we could say we made quite a few mistakes along the way, but we've got a lot of learnings from that. And I think other markets are now looking at that, saying, how can we build off those learnings? And yeah, I think the balance will shift more to market-driven approaches in other countries.
Thank you, and hopefully that will answer Mariana's question there at the bottom on Slido. I guess there's a link then in with Masood's question, possibly to you, Jim, if you can see it there. And what is your view of how commercial open banking APIs should be developed on a proprietary basis or global standards?
I can't actually see the question, but
sorry. So shall I read it out for you?
Thank you. Go
on. What's Mastercard's view of the future state of standards based on commercial open banking APIs? Should it be case-by-case proprietary or global standards?
Yeah, I mean, so again, without wishing to kind of keep banging the same drum, actually one of the attractions from our perspective with the acquisition of Finicity is... Try that again. Can you hear me now? One of the attractions of Finicity is that the co-founders, actually Nick and Steve there, have been at the heart of the creation of an organization called FDX in the US, Financial Data Exchange. That's absolutely a standardization play over there. You wouldn't be surprised to hear that Mastercard thinks that standardization is a good thing. In fact, there was an internal meeting yesterday, and the analogy somebody used was, one of the problems with open banking is there isn't ISO 8583. Everyone's doing their own thing. One of the things that's made cards work so well globally is standardization. We clearly have the same view. It's how do you get there is the interesting thing. FDX in the US could be a path in North America, but kind of a bit like was said earlier, the early days of the internet and so on, there were various competing things out there, and kind of nature took its course, and now we all have something which works. I think kind of all one can really do is not make the problem worse by inventing new things, rather see what's there, take it, leverage it, try not to, kind of create new proprietary things on top if one possibly can. And I think, that can be hard sometimes, because standardization can also mean limitations when you're trying to build a commercial business. But I think that just requires a degree of, maturity, I suppose, and of understanding the kind of natural pace of evolution of some of these things. But yeah, to be clear, we like standardization.
Can I just make a point on to build on what Jim said? So FTX is a market-driven standards body in the States, and is got a very strong membership now, sort of who's who financial institutions in the States. OBIE in the UK, we took the decision very early on to partner with the Open Identity Foundation around the creation of the kind of security model for open banking. This model, many of you will know, called the FAPI profile. And FTX has also agreed to partner in a similar manner with the Open ID Foundation. So whilst there are differences between FTX and the UK standard, the kind of similarity is around adoption of the FAPI profile. That's also now largely the same profile that's being used for the Consumer Data Rights Standard in Australia. So I think there is actually quite a lot of synergy between some of these standards. So whilst you do have different standards in different markets, I think there is synergy there, and I think everyone's trying to move stuff closer together, which is a good thing.
Just
Thank you,
back to just a point on, can you be commercial and be standard? If you look at every phone we operate, that all has SMTP to do your email. Some use the native apps, some pay for other apps. If you looked at the capital markets, there's a standard called FIX, Financial Interchange Protocol, and that was adopted by the capital markets back in 1997. And now every equities, FX, has got extended out to rates and other fixed income products. And so that allowed all the banks to talk because there was an open standard as well. So I think standards are great if they're owned by ISO, they're owned by the World Wide Web Federation and others. And that's the sort of level we need to own at, somebody who is global and can own a standard at a significant level and endorse it rather than localized standards or niche ones or ones that aren't don't have the embrace of ISO. So I think to take open banking forward, standards are great. They do need to be global, and standards makes actually commercialization a lot easier because your product works in every market. So you don't have to tweak it. You don't have to modify it, localize it. It just works. SMTP works for every mail system in the world, for example.
Brilliant, thank you. So standards, a consistent sort of theme coming up here as we try and look forward. And given the question we set on poll, let's see if the audience agree. So the question we asked earlier was, what's the role of set industry-wide standards when looking to commercialize APIs? And 93% of people think it's either crucial or important. So it sounds like there's agreement across all the ecosystem that we need standards in order to develop commercial APIs. I guess, Nigel, a sort of follow-up based on some of those experiences that you mentioned before, and when you look at a phone, I think the Bluetooth standard would be another example that's allowed lots of new propositions to develop off it. What do you think will drive the development of new standards in the future, either in the UK or globally? What will be the force behind that, do you think? Sorry, if we can we unmute Nigel, sorry.
Let's go, there we go. It'll be driven by a combination of consumers and by regulators the ideal way, because the regulators get people to the inertia, and they do play a massive role in that, but they're not standards bodies. I think it's all the niche open banking initiatives in the UK and Europe and Australia and Canada, and it's starting, I know, in Israel, and talking to the regulator down there and others. They should all need to get the ISO involved, so that the protocols are made a standard, as you said, in the for the cards world, for messaging. There's also the 22 or something as well, the messaging. So that is quite a task, because that's probably a 5 to 10 year task to get those really out. 5 years probably is the first publication, but that will really radically change the ability of openness and global banking. Because if you look at anybody who's a global bank, and I'm not picking HSBC, I'm just happen to know some of the numbers, that's about 50 banks with one logo on the top, and that's how it exists. If you had open banking standards across those 50 banks, I can guarantee HSBC internally would operate a lot more efficiently as well, because you've had protocols allow you to decouple internal logic. So it's the whole thinking that people like Richard Stallman, who is behind the Open Source Foundation and all those movements out of MIT not many years ago, that whole open protocol, open standards and everything does mean you can be a lot more efficient and a lot more powerful and work in an open world. And you look at the places where people have their fiefdom and they're still trying to control it, and everybody else is open. It's Apple found it with the email. They had a great email app, but nobody liked it because everybody was an SMTP and things. So openness does drive commercialization, and where in the banking world, I think where we possibly struggle is you look at the boards of majority of larger legacy financial services organizations, not just banks. You find there isn't somebody who understands open protocols. You find somebody who understands risk, understands lending, understands customer on those sides. But I think there's also a challenge to get the right talent at the board level to sponsor openness and to sponsor open protocols to deliver this new world of banking. And the other thing that will drive it, I think, is cost-income ratios. In other words, because you're going to, most banks have fairly lousy cost-income ratios at the moment, especially if you haven't got any scale or you're not totally niche. And being able to have open protocols, so not everything's proprietary within your walled garden, drives down your cost of delivery, your cost of operations, and everything, cost of integrations, the lot.
So I guess moving on from standards quickly, then we've seen a fair amount of recent M&A activity, and we heard earlier from Jim about the Finicity acquisition there. Jim, in terms of sort of when looking to partner or acquire sort of with FinTechs, have you got any sort of trends that you're seeing either in the market or with Mastercard?
Well, I mean, I think just generally, there's lots of it going on. Kind of famously at the start of the open banking stuff in the UK, HSBC working with people like Verdon, stuff like that. And a very smart play, bring the best of both together. From our perspective, we kind of take a similar view. We invest heavily in a program called Start Path, which is all about worldwide identifying businesses with significant potential and with some relevance to what Mastercard's trying to do. And it's more than just an incubator, trying to provide some value to those organizations, and so it's kind of important part of what we do, and some of those we bring into the portfolio, some of them we don't. Equally, in terms of our open banking activities, we're working closely with a couple of FinTechs here in the UK. It's public domain. We're working with Consensus and with Token, for example, and the logic is a fairly simple one. Being clear about what your business goals are and having a very sort of rational, calm, thought through build versus buy versus acquire type of thought process whenever you've got to make a decision. So in some cases we're building things, in other cases we're buying or partnering. And I think every large organization trying to kind of do things at pace is and should be going through exactly that sort of activity. But now, we don't have religion on that one. We won't always build, we won't always partner, we won't always acquire. Trying to make the right thought through decision on any given particular business problem, any particular topic. And therefore, an important skill is one of effectively due diligence, as in shortlisting, having a proper look, asking the hard questions, listening carefully to the answers, because of course, it's very easy to get sort of suckered into some of these incredibly exciting PowerPoint. You need to understand what the reality is.
Just say one thing. We went through Start Path several years ago, and in terms of organisations that are particularly good at engaging with the startup world, both Mastercard and Visa have great programs, and I think the banking world could really take a lead on the sheer openness and the support as well that both the schemes have given to the startup world, and has accelerated a ton of people. Airwallex, for example, was on the same one as us. Flutterwave was on with us, and they've all got getting into big companies now.
Yeah. No, thanks, Nigel. Glad it was of value.
Yeah. And you paid for the beers in Miami, which is even better.
Well, indeed.
Thank you. Hetal, in terms of sort of what you've seen from a compete versus partner versus acquire perspective open banking proposition, what are your views?
I think we think about it very similarly to Mastercard. All those options are tools, and depending what job you want to do, you pull the right tool out. I think there's a whole bunch of things to think about in each case. If you're going to export things across markets, say hello to my little one.
Can you go on my screen?
Yes, you can. iPad time. Excuse us. Where was I? I've completely lost my thread. So all of those are options, and I think it very much depends on what you're trying to achieve. So we currently have globally now 5 different use cases live with 5 different FinTechs or TPPs, depending on the vernacular in the market. And particularly when you're at an early stage of prototyping something, it just makes a lot of sense to work with partners so you can quickly get something mobilized, test it with customers, ideally have a discrete app rather than build it into your core ones, because that always takes longer, thanks to just good old-fashioned focus on resilience. You test something, you learn, you prioritize the features, and then you can demise that prototype if need be and migrate features into your core services, knowing that they actually do work for customers. Coming back to one of the points we were talking about earlier, I think one of the other things that we're going to need to think about with all of this around innovation is valuation. So I think the pandemic has created an interesting dynamic where we're seeing valuations are potentially starting to soften in FinTech, where they've been pretty exciting and frothy for the last couple of years. And I think that may mean we see a bunch more acquisition over the next 24 months than we have in the past 24, particularly large corporates who would traditionally look at quite strong value measures and therefore may have been dissuaded in recent times, may now feel more confident going out and making acquisitions to bring skills, technology, cultures into their firms.
Thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to now just to move to questions from the audience. So if anyone does have any questions, then please do put them in there, and I can see if you're ready. So first one is a question for all the panel. What is the bridge for commercial open banking APIs? Is it an introduction of open finance, and when do you think this will happen? Who wants to kick us off?
I'm happy to take a stab at that, Rory. I don't think it's open finance if what the question meant is a regulation, perhaps similar to the Australian Consumer Data Right, which extends PSD2 to other domains. I think that will come in due course, but I don't think that's that's the next step in this. I think the next step for me is likely to be identity. I think Chris mentioned it earlier, and we certainly see lots and lots of interesting use cases which make customers' lives easier, make corporate customers' lives easier by auto-populating, reducing the operational risk and potential fraud risks that you have in normal application processes of all sorts. So there's a real opportunity, I think, for large financial institutions, thanks to our own KYC standards that we have, thanks to regulation, to use that data, monetize that data, and actually bring significant efficiency to the wider ecosystem. I think if we fail to do that, then we are inviting others to make us do it. But I don't think that's where we'll end up. I think we will see an increasing number of use cases in this space within the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you. And I think, Chris, you did have a view, didn't you? And then on to Jim after that then.
I think Hetal's very eloquently said pretty much exactly what I was going to say.
Brilliant.
Just say one thing. It's banks are places of safety for money, and have been for hundreds of years, and that's why HSBC's deposits go up in any time when there's any sort of stress to the system, and always will do, because they've always looked after people's money in 99% of the case of time. So why can't there be a place of safety for people's data as well? And I totally mirror what Hetal's saying. If they're safe for money, they've got the processes, systems, they've got the sensibility of management, and who all understand safety. And so let's look at, could they be repositories for our data, and it's a new business model for banks. of my identity. I love HSBC of my identity because I trust them. And that's maybe contrary to other comments I have, but I do fundamentally trust them. And that's what they have with all their brands, is a colossal amount of trust.
Thank you. So, and Jim, I did say that you could speak, but if you, I'm going to actually ask you the next question, if I may, which will probably be our last one, given time. So the one from Paul. So there's been lots of focus on good consumer use cases, but what do the panel think we're missing in terms of opportunities for the SME segment?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, actually. We're, in terms of our European aggregator offering called Connect, at the moment we're seeing growing demand. I wouldn't say massive demand, but growing demand for business type use cases. So it is absolutely out there. I think, it is, and there are certain players who are, very clearly focused on that segment. I mean, so for example, those involved in small business accounting and invoicing type services have long since flipped across from screen scraping to using the API. So it is happening, but it's happening kind of quietly in the background. Again, I think without wishing to kind of be boring, the lending opportunity is significant there as well. So I think it's coming along. I think, what's also interesting though is that, when you think beyond small business and start getting into mid and even large corporate, that's a completely different ballgame. But yet the same basic needs are there in terms of secure access to the underlying data. Traditionally, the kind of large treasury banks have made available corporates data to their corporate ERP provider through kind of, pretty old school interfaces that tends to be proprietary ERP to ERP, or even sometimes customer to customer. And those treasury banks have big businesses, big product lines, big revenue streams called access. So I think it's always been there, but it just hasn't had the same profile. It just, maybe not as sexy, maybe not as glamorous, but actually I think there's probably at least as much money to be made there for the supply chain in toto, including the banks themselves if they play their cards correctly. And because there's a lot of value to be created for those businesses, it's happening. It's just happening more quietly, I would say.
I think business payments is a real quick win for small businesses at the moment. So if you're a business, you're paying your tax, you're paying your staff, you're paying your suppliers. Doing that via a payment API is a real quick win that I think we're starting to see, and we'll start to see that growing quite quickly.
And managing your receivables on the invoicing side and just making it easier for your customers to pay you. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, with that, I don't think we probably have much time for any more questions. Now we've got about 3 minutes left. So I'd like to thank you all and hand back to Helen for her closing remarks.
Rory, thank you. Wow, how do I follow that? Just to share some of the feedback I've been having on WhatsApp. Cracking content was one. That everybody, Hetal, your little girl, has got her little fan club all of her own. And exceptional content, and it just goes on. Authentic is another one. So a big thank you to the panel. I personally am going to listen again on demand because there was so much to take in. One of my key takeaways is that open banking 2.0 isn't as far away as we actually think. It's probably happening here and now. Okay, so just to close here. We're all finding our new norm, and for us, that's keeping with our rhythm. We don't have an OBE in December or August. So we're a small team that's worked incredibly hard to keep everybody connected through the pandemic. And we've also been working, and it's a privilege to do so, to support our OBE heroes behind the scene. So we will be taking August off. And it's my opportunity now to say a big thank you to my team, a very big heartfelt thank you to Tatiana. And we've had some support from her 5-year-old son. And he was the one that drew the rainbow for our OBE heroes, and for everybody else that helps to put on OBE and everything you don't see behind the scenes. So it's a time for everybody to take some time to rest and recharge. We are back in September. We will be having a new look live streaming page. So the frame will be far more information driven. So this is your platform, your voice, and we would love you to get involved. So please, during August, reach out to me and we can work together collaboratively to create something new. We will actually still be keeping you company on social media, so we're not going that far away. So all that remains really for me to do is to say an absolutely big thank you to our special speakers. Terrific was one of the words that was constantly coming in on my WhatsApp feed. So that's what the audience think, and I would agree. You've been absolutely terrific. So all that remains now is to wish everybody a lovely summer, to dust off the cabin fever and to have some fun recharging your batteries. So wishing you and your families the very, very best of health. Thank you and goodbye.